Ella gritaba: «No tenemos dónde ir, señor», manteniendo a su bebé cerca. El ranchero solo gritaba: «Entonces tú perteneces aquí, territorio de Kansas, diciembre de 1881». El viento se movía por las playas como un animal herido. El nieve se rompió a la izquierda, golpeándose a través de las zapatillas y los huesos. La noche había llegado temprano, engordando la tierra, en un silencio oscuro y fantástico, excepto por los pasos de una mujer que era demasiado fina para cargar la pesadilla que llevaba. Eleanor Hargrove puso su espalda más tigra alrededor de sus espaldas, sus fronteras friándose como su esperanza. En sus brazos, un bebé no mayor de 10 días se cruzó contra su pecho tapado con lo que quedaba de una blanquita de hueso. Se acercó a través del nevado deslizamiento, ojos escogiendo la outlina indistinta de una estructura distante. Un rancho. Luminos en la ventana, fuego subiendo de la chimenea. Llamaba que no fuera una mirada. Llegó a la pared con las piernas tremulando desde días sin dormir y los labios abiertos por el viento y el silencio. Su mano abierta se abrió por encima de la puerta. Luego un toque. 3 pasos suaves, casi perdidos en el viento. La puerta se abrió con un grito. Un hombre alto se sentó en la puerta con la espalda larga, con el vestido oscuro sobre una camiseta roja, el nieve rociando sus botas y el cabello. Sus ojos eran gris, no fríos, pero inlesibles. La voz de Eleanor casi se levantó por encima del bosque. «No tenemos dónde ir, señor». Los ojos del hombre no se encontraban con sus. En lugar de eso, se fijaron en la niña en sus brazos, el pequeño rostro, ardiendo de hielo, flotando y sonriendo. No habló de inmediato. Solo miró a la niña respirar. Luego, después de un largo paso, dijo calmamente: «Entonces tú perteneces aquí». Se apuntó y dejó la puerta abierta. No ofreció una mano, no dio nombre. Simplemente se volvió y caminó por dentro. Eleanor seguía la calma del fuego, la abrazaba como a la mano de un extraño, inesperada pero bienvenida. La puerta se cerró detrás de ella. Las nubes se derramaron en las paredes del piso mientras ella estaba insegura. La casa era limpia pero tranquila. Una habitación con un gran arco de piedra, una mesa, 2 asientos y un pequeño coche apuntando cerca del fuego. Todo en su lugar, todo esperando. El hombre regresó con un blanquillo de madera pesado y lo colocó lentamente en el coche. «Puedes dormir ahí», dijo. «Hay agua en el cuchillo. Encontrarás un lado por la estufa». Ella gritó, pero no dijo nada. Su garganta dolió con más que solo frío. Se volvió a salir. Luego se detuvo en la puerta. «Voy a estar en el jardín», dijo. «Si el bebé llora, no te preocupes. Escucho cosas incluso cuando intento no hacerlo». Luego se fue. Eleanor miró por la habitación. Sus ojos se acercaban a un dibujo de fondo sobre el mantel. 2 cabezas. Una mujer con ojos amables. Un niño no más de 5 años. Su pelo se movía como el mar en el viento. Las líneas de pincel eran suaves, amables, frías en el tiempo. Ella caminó al jardín y dejó a la niña apuntando el blanquillo más alto sobre su pecho. Se movió, pero no despertó. Sus manos se quedaban en su pecho, sintiendo el aumento y el fallo de su respiro. Por primera vez en días, no se sintió asesinada. Se sentó al lado del fuego, los pantalones secados, los pies abiertos, y miró hacia las llamas. Bailaban, pero no hablaban. Solo quemaban, tranquilos, silenciosos, como el hombre que abrió su puerta sin preguntar su nombre. Afuera la tormenta se intensificó, pero dentro algo cambió. No la calidez, no la seguridad, aún no. La habitación. Habitación para respirar, para ser, para existir. Y tal vez, solo tal vez, espacio para permanecer. Eleanor se despertó con un dolor duro en su pecho. El frío se infundió en sus huesos por la noche. Más allá de la ventana, el nieve todavía se puso en las hojas gruesas. El fuego había muerto, pero la amabilidad de los abogados permaneció. Una pota fresca de polvo se sentó en la mesa, llenando el aire con una calidez que había casi olvidado. 2 horas después, ella esponjaba unos pedazos pero cada palo se sentía como agua. Su culpa, su vergüenza y su exhaustión permanecieron más que una cena. Above the table, her eyes caught a small leather pouch holding a faded locket. Her mother's wedding photo, now a worn sepia. Eleanor's fingers curled around it, tracing the curve of her own mother's face. She remembered Caleb Hargrove, handsome, dangerous, loyal to his gang. He had courted her under the willow by the saloon, promising a life beyond this lonely town. He moved with swagger, gun at hip, and a chuckle that drew her in. She believed in the promise of adventure, in the idea of being loved. But those guns led him down a dark path. Bank heists, smoke-hilled train robberies, and a trail of whispered rumors. Eleanor did not join him in those crimes, but she stood by him. Love can build strange sanctuaries and dangerous prisons too. When Caleb was captured, the town watched as they hanged him at dawn. The entire square stood silent, only the wind speaking, as the trapdoor opened beneath his boots. He did not die quietly. His face twisted in rage and fear, his throat cut short. Eleanor had been hidden in a wagon nearby, forced to watch. After his death, the world turned on her. The church doors closed. Taps in the general store slammed shut. A baker refused her bread. A butcher spat when she asked for meat. She tried to find work scrubbing floors or washing clothes, but no one would hire her. One woman spit at her feet. They said she wore his guilt the way she wore his coat proudly, and that was enough to condemn her. She moved into an abandoned cabin at the edge of town, living off parched biscuits and water drawn from a well so deep she almost lost consciousness hauling the bucket. The nights were the but his spirit fragile. She knew if she stayed, he would starve before spring. She could no longer bear it. So she packed her few belongings in the dead of winter, a frayed dress her mother had made the locket worn soft by tears, a carved wooden toy she had made herself. She pressed the baby to her chest and whispered through tears, "We have to go for you." She left before sunrise, stepping over the threshold into a world that wanted to forget her and feared her for all she had lost. The trek through deep drifts was brutal. Eleanor stumbled with each step, arms aching from holding her son, eyes red from wind and determination. She focused on one goal: movement, always forward. The baby slept fitfully, his tiny fists curled around her clothing. She hummed soft lullabies Caleb used to hum when they lay beneath stars, songs that now felt like shards in her heart. By nightfall, she found herself on a ridge overlooking a pale valley. Exhausted, she dug a shallow snow trench to lie in. The baby whimpered. She held him tighter, wrapping him in the thin blanket again. She thought of the ranch house, just a glimmer of light in a field of white, and prayed it was not her undoing. Before dawn, frost had stiffened her hair, her shawl. Still she pressed on, leaving footprints that vanished behind her. She remembered how the town had watched Caleb swing, how they spat when she tried to cover his coffin with flowers. Now she covered her son with the same blanket, smoothing it over his chest, and whispered, "I will not let you die." Then she saw the fence posts, the smoke, the lights. Someone was waiting beyond the door. Eleanor inhaled, heart pounding. She smoothed her shawl and tucked the locket inside. She lifted the baby and placed a hand on the door. She touched the wood and whispered to herself, "Here we can live." She rapped her knuckles again 3 times. No wind stole the sound this time. The door opened. She swayed forward and said in a low tremor, "We got nowhere to go, sir." His eyes met hers, not with disdain, but with something like recognition of her truth. Then she heard him say the words that would change everything. Then, "You belong here." The room was still when Eleanor opened her eyes. Faint morning light poured through a thin lace curtain, its edges stiff with time and dust. The scent of cedar and cold earth filled her nose. For a moment, she did not remember where she was until the baby stirred against her chest, a soft sigh escaping his lips. She sat up slowly, wincing. A folded quilt covered her body, one she had not pulled over herself. On the small table by the wall, a bowl of hot porridge steamed beside a tin cup of water. There was no note, just silence. The bed beneath her creaked faintly. Its frame was carved worn smooth by years of use. Across the room, hung above a narrow dresser, was a framed drawing. A woman, delicate lines capturing a gentle face, stood with a young boy clinging to her skirt. Both were smiling. Eleanor stood careful not to wake the baby and stepped closer. Dust clung to the edges of the frame. Her fingers trembled as she reached out and straightened it slightly. It had tilted, as if the house itself had forgotten to care. By the window, a hand-stitched curtain fluttered. She touched the edge. The fabric was brittle, embroidered with wildflowers, faded but once bright. One corner had frayed into threads. She carried it to the bed and began to stitch it, her fingers remembering the rhythm of repair. She did not know the woman in the drawing, but she honored her just the same. The house felt like a place where breath had been held too long. Eleanor explored quietly over the next day. She found the kitchen untouched, pans neatly hung but dusty. A table large enough for four sat beneath a lamp that had not been lit in years. The shelves were full but sterile, not neglected but preserved. That night she heard footsteps creak across the porch and then fade away toward the barn. Through a crack in the curtain, she saw Wes Thatcher disappear into the tool shed behind the house. A wool blanket slung over one shoulder, a lantern in hand. He had given her the only bed, the only fire, and did not ask for thanks. Each morning, a bowl of food appeared on the table. Once it was cornbread and molasses, another time, lentil stew and a slice of smoked pork. He never spoke, never entered the room, but something in the way the food was arranged. The careful folding of the napkin, the exact height of the water in the cup, said more than words. On the third morning, Eleanor rose early. She cleaned the stove, polished the counters, with what little lies she could find. Her baby cooed in a cradle she built from old crates lined with the shawl from her bundle. She wiped the dust from the windowsills. She beat the rugs out back. She found a drawer full of linens untouched and began washing them by the well. Her fingers cracked from the cold water, but she did not stop. Each act was a small defiance against forgetting. She never entered the other rooms, but she felt them ghosts behind closed doors. Wes appeared only in passing, walking past the windows with buckets, his boots crunching over frost, the barn door groaning open in the dark. He tipped his hat once when she caught his eye. Nothing more. Still she noticed. The tools he set out neatly for her in the shed, a stack of firewood left closer to the door, a pair of mittens placed atop her crate cradle when morning frost bit hardest. Each small kindness came without fanfare, but she gathered them like breadcrumbs, leading her back towards something she feared she had lost dignity. That night, as the baby slept beside her, Eleanor sat by the firelight and stitched a tiny square of cloth, her son's initials, the year, and one line. This house remembers now. She folded it neatly and slid it into the same drawer where the curtain had once lived. No one had asked her to stay. No one had told her she could, but she had begun quietly to belong. The days passed slow and cold. Snow still covered the ground in patches, but the wind had softened its bite. The cabin no longer creaked with emptiness. It breathed now quietly, hesitantly, like something wounded learning how to live again. Eleanor worked with purpose. She rose before dawn, bundled in the same patched coat, and fed the hens. She shoveled snow from the stable path, chopped root vegetables for stew, and scrubbed the iron skillet until it gleamed. Wes never asked for her help. She gave it anyway. He remained distant, cordial, but brief. They spoke only when necessary about supplies, the weather, or the baby. She never asked about the photos or the names carved into the beam above the hearth. He never asked where she had come from or what she had lost. Still, something shifted. The baby, her boy, was growing stronger. He began to kick with his little legs and smile at the sunlight through the window. One morning, while Eleanor mashed boiled carrots, he let out a sudden high-pitched giggle. The sound startled her. It startled Wes, too. He was on the porch fixing a broken chair leg and froze mid-motion. He did not say a word, but he sat there a while longer, the hammer idle in his hand, just listening. That night, Eleanor stood at the foot of the bed, staring at the small bundle of cloth she had unfolded. It was a baby's shirt, blue-checkered soft, with age the buttons loose. It had belonged to another child. She had found it at the bottom of a linen chest, beneath an old quilt, and a stuffed rabbit missing one eye. She should have folded it back and left it untouched. But instead, she sat by the fire and began to mend it, needle in hand thread, trembling. A tear fell onto the fabric as she worked. She whispered a lullaby to the baby sleeping nearby, half sung, half wept, and kept stitching. Wes saw her through the doorway. He had come in quietly, boots damp from checking the fence line, arms full of kindling. He paused just long enough to see the flicker of pain cross her face. He did not speak. He turned, walked to the hearth, and added another log to the fire. The flame caught quickly, throwing warm light across the floor. The crackle of it filled the silence between them. Eleanor looked up but said nothing. He did not meet her eyes. The next morning she found a folded cloth beside the cradle, a child's cap made of wool, perfectly her son's size. She never asked who left it there. Kappa's favorite drink came in a plastic exterior can. By late February, the thaw began. Little shoots of green peeked out along the path to the barn. Eleanor planted potatoes in a narrow trench behind the cabin. She patched holes in the chicken coop roof with bark and tar. She even coaxed the old mare Ruth into letting her brush her mane without fuss. Each night the fire burned warmer. Each morning the boy laughed louder. Wes remained silent, but his actions changed. He built a small bench outside the door so Eleanor could sit in the sun while feeding the baby. He repaired a cracked window pane with waxed paper so the wind would not chill the sleeping child. When she sliced her hand peeling turnips, he wordlessly cleaned the cut and wrapped it in linen, then handed her a pair of gloves he said were too small for his hands anyway. No promises, no questions, just the quiet rhythm of two people doing what must be done. One afternoon, Eleanor came in from the garden, hands dirty, cheeks pink from wind. She found Wes standing by the cradle, one calloused finger being grasped tightly by the baby's tiny hand. The look on his face, caught somewhere between awe and grief, disappeared the moment he saw her. He stepped back quickly, clearing his throat. "He's got a strong grip." Eleanor nodded. "He does." And then, as if the words were heavier than nails, Wes added softly, "So did mine." They stood in the silence of that truth, two people with different losses, but the same hollow ache. Eleanor stepped forward and picked up the child. "Thank you for the wool cap." Wes shrugged, was just sitting there. She smiled faintly. "Well, it fits." That night, she tucked the mended blue shirt around her baby's body and whispered, "You're safe now," not as a wish, but as something she believed. Outside, Wes sat on the porch, listening to the wind move through the trees. And for the first time in 7 winters, the cold did not feel so sharp. It was nearing dusk when the stranger rode in. Dust clung to the legs of his long duster coat, and his horse limped slightly, favoring its left hind. He was not young, not old, just worn the way men got when they had seen too much and remembered it all. Wes spotted him from the porch. He stepped down slowly, hand resting near his hip, not on his gun, but close enough to remind the man he had one. Even in the stranger said, "Horse threw a shoe up north, been riding dry for hours." Wes gave a short nod. "Water's by the trough." The man dismounted and let the horse drink. He wiped his brow with a grimy handkerchief, then glanced toward the house. "That your woman?" he asked, eyes narrowing, as he saw Eleanor through the kitchen window, bouncing the baby gently in her arms. Wes said nothing. The man grinned. "Saw her once back in Silk Creek. Name's Eleanor Hargrove, ain't it?" Wes's posture changed. "You know her. Not personally, just know the name. Hell, most folks west of the Kansas River do. She's the widow of Caleb Hargrove." There was a pause. The man let that hang in the air like gun smoke. Then with a slow smirk, he said, "Guess I ought to let certain folks know she's out this way. Ain't everybody made peace with what her husband did?" Wes stepped forward. "You do that, you won't ride far." The man raised both hands in mock surrender. "Just talking, mister. Just talking." He mounted his horse, tipped his hat, and rode off into the falling dark. Wes stood there long after the hoofbeats faded. That night he did not speak during supper. Eleanor noticed. She did not press him, but when the baby was asleep and the fire was low, Wes turned to her with eyes. Name it followed me like rot. "You think I care about a name," Wes said, standing now pacing. "That man, your husband, he rode with the same gang that murdered my family." Eleanor's voice cracked. "I know. You know," he shouted. "Do you know what it's like to come home to silence, to find your wife with her throat cut and your boy shot in his own crib?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Do you think I chose him? I was 18. He came into town wearing charm like a badge, promising better than laundry wages and broken windows. He lied like a poet." Wes turned away, fists clenched. "I didn't know what he was until it was too late. And when I did, I tried to leave. He locked me in that damn cabin and rode off with blood on his hands. I hated him, Wes. I hated him before the gallows ever took him." He faced her again, breathing hard. "I didn't choose him," she whispered, "but I chose to live. After the town turned on me, after the church refused my baby, his baptism after they left bread on my step, with rat poison in it, I still chose to stay alive. For my son." Wes's face crumpled slightly, like something inside him bent, but did not break. "You should have told me," he said. "And if I had, you'd have turned us away at the door." "I don't know," he admitted. "I honestly don't." There was a long silence. The fire popped once, soft and hollow. Eleanor stood holding her child to her chest. "If you want us gone, say it now." Wes looked at her. Really, looked at the thin line of her shoulders, the way her hand shielded the baby's head, the tired in her eyes that had nothing to do with sleep. "I don't want you gone," he said at last. She didn't reply. She just sank into the rocker beside the fire and rocked the baby gently the way only a woman who had lost too much could. Outside, the wind picked up. And in that room between the shadows of names long dead and the breathing warmth of something still alive, neither of them said another word. But both of them knew the past had come knocking, and it would not be the last time. The wind howled through the canyons that morning, curling around the Thatcher Ranch like a hungry ghost. Snow blew in sidewise, and the sky was the color of lead. Wes was sharpening a fence post when he saw them 3 riders at the edge of the ridge. black coats flapping like carrion birds, moving slow but sure. He knew the look, that cold patience, men who had ridden in packs, men who knew how to wait and kill. He ducked back inside. Eleanor looked up from where she was nursing the baby by the hearth. One glance at Wes's face, and she knew. "They're not here for you," he said. "Lo, they're here for me." She stood fast. "Who, old ghosts?" he muttered. "I once shot a man named Reese Gallo. He was their leader. I did it to stop a massacre, but I never buried the price." Eleanor tightened her grip on the child. "What do we do?" Wes hesitated, then looked her square in the eye. "We fight smart." In the next hour, they worked silently. Eleanor wrapped the baby in wool and hid him beneath the floorboards under the hearth. An old smuggler's crawl Jack had once shown her. She whispered soft prayers as she closed the plank. Then she grabbed 2 lanterns and followed Wes to the barn. "We light the hay bales," he said, gesturing. "Smoke, confusion. I'll draw them around back." "And me?" she asked. He run. She stared at him. "No, Eleanor." I said, "No." He froze. "I'm tired of running," she said. "If this is my home, I protect it." She set the lanterns in place, looped the wick back for faster ignition. Wes watched, stunned, as she moved like someone who had faced down worse than death. The gunshots came at dusk. The first rider charged through the front gate, gun raised. Wes fired from the hayloft, taking him down with one clean shot. The second rider dismounted and tried to flank the barn, but a tripwire snapped his ankle, sending him face first into the snow. The third man kicked open the barn door. That was when Eleanor hurled the lit lantern. It shattered against the wall, flames rushing up the dry timber. The horses screamed in their stalls. Smoke filled the rafters, and the man cursed, backing out into the wind. Wes tackled him from behind. The snow turned red for a moment. Then silence. Wes stood bleeding from a cut across his ribs. He turned and found Eleanor there, breathless soot on her cheeks, hair wild with ash and wind. "You stayed," he said, voice hoarse. "I was not going to lose another home," she said simply. He stared at her, stunned. "You didn't run," he said again, like he could not believe it. "I'm not just someone's widow anymore," she whispered. "I'm someone's mother, and maybe someone's something more." Wes blinked, his hand pressed to his side, where the blood soaked through. She stepped forward and gently pulled his coat back. "You're hurt. It's nothing. Let me help." He did not resist. Inside, she cleaned the wound. With water boiled over the fire, tore strips of linen from her own underskirt and wrapped him with careful hands. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she never stopped. Wes watched her chest tight. No one had touched him with such purpose since the day his wife died. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside something else had taken root, quiet and slow and fierce as fire. The last frost came late that year. Wes Thatcher stood beside the old barn, hammer in hand, driving the final nail into a new crossbeam. The boards were uneven, some from salvaged wood, some newly cut, but they held. They held because he wanted them to. Across the yard, Eleanor knelt by the clothesline, pinning up a child's blue wool shirt, her own weaving, careful and fine. The boy toddled at her side, chubby fingers grasping at a length of twine. He was starting to walk, little legs unsteady, but determined, always trying to follow the shadow of Wes wherever he went. Wes had noticed he just never said it out loud. That morning, while mending a broken stirrup, he had heard it soft and clear. "Pa," the boy had said, reaching toward him. Just once, but it landed like thunder. Wes froze. He had not known what to say. Eleanor had stood still by the porch steps, her face going pale, then pink. She had not looked at him, just gathered the baby in her arms and gone inside. Wes stayed where he was, holding the stirrup like it weighed 100 pounds. That night, as the wind whispered through the hills, Wes returned to the cabin with 2 things in his arms, a box of kindling and a small pair of leather boots. He placed the kindling in the bin, then without a word, set the boots beside the hearth, right between his own worn pair and Eleanor's muddy ones. He did not speak. Eleanor, seated by the fire with her needlework, looked up, then down. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of breath held of hearts that dared not move too quickly. She watched him straighten the boots just slightly, so they faced the room like they belonged. "I thought," he said, voice low, "he might need them soon." Eleanor swallowed. "He will." They said nothing more. Later that night, after the baby had fallen asleep, curled against her side, Eleanor rose and walked to the boots. She ran her fingers along the seams, touched the place where Wes had stitched the leather by hand. He had never said the words, but every stitch was a promise. Every gesture, clearing snow from the path before she stepped out, carving a toy horse, from pine setting a pot of stew to simmer. When her hands were full, was a wordless vow, and she felt it now deep in her bones. She had come to this place lost, but perhaps not by accident. Perhaps some homes were not built by bloodlines or vows. Perhaps they were forged by fire, by mercy, by choosing to stay when it was easier to leave. She turned then. Wes stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching her. Their eyes met. He said nothing. He stepped forward. Still nothing needed saying, because between two broken people, some truths were best left to silence, the kind of silence that healed, not harmed. And in that quiet cabin, with the boots by the fire and the snow beginning to melt outside, something soft began to bloom. It had no name yet, but it had roots. Spring came slowly, but it came. The frost melted from the high grass, and with it the heavy silence that had once weighed down West Thatcher's land, where once only snow and sorrow had rested. Now crocus and violet pushed through the earth, small defiant bursts of color along the fence line. Wes stood by the edge of the field, the wind brushing his coat, and watched the cabin through the rising morning mist. In the window, Eleanor's silhouette moved gracefully, holding the baby to her chest, humming something soft. Then she turned sunlight, catching her face as she smiled at something the child did. That smile, unaware of being seen, unguarded, struck Wes like a warm current through cold water. He had not thought forgiveness looked like this. He had not expected it would come as quietly as breath, as steady as dawn. Later that afternoon, Eleanor began folding linens into a cloth bag. She stood on the porch steps, glancing toward the small storage shed. Wes had once cleared out a space he had never offered, yet she had assumed it was time to make her own place. Wes walked across the yard slowly. In his hand, a small bundle wrapped in burlap. "You leavin'?" he asked, voice low but not cold. She looked up surprised. "No, just thought maybe I should give you back your space." He stepped closer, eyes on hers. "What if I do not want it back?" She said nothing. Wes unwrapped the bundle, revealing a silver ring dulled with age but carefully polished. "I can't change what brought us here," he said, fingers turning the ring slowly. "But I'd be proud if you stayed." Eleanor's throat tightened. Her eyes filled, but no tears fell. She reached out and gently closed his hand around the ring. "Then this is home," she whispered. Behind them, the boy toddled into the yard, arms outstretched, laughing as he stumbled into a patch of soft dirt. "Look, Mama," he shouted in his half-formed words. "We're home now." Eleanor smiled, turned back to Wes and slipped her hand into his. "Yes," she said, voice firm with peace. "We are." They stood like that for a long while. Three figures on a land once haunted, now healed. And no one spoke Caleb Hargrove's name again, not because it was forgotten, but because it no longer defined anything. People in town would whisper when they heard. Some would say he married the outlaw's widow. Others would call her brave. A few would never forgive. But none of it mattered here on this stretch of quiet Kansas earth. Only the new seeds mattered. only the hand in his, the small boots near the hearth, the breath of spring. The name on the land was Thatcher, and for the first time in years, it meant something whole. If this story stirred something in your heart, because love is not always about where we come from, but who chooses to stay, then please hit that like button, leave a comment for Eleanor and Wes, and don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. Every week, we bring you powerful tales of love that rose through dust bullets and the kind of silence only heartbreak leaves behind. Do you love the Wild West? Do you believe in second chances? Then stick around, because here, everyone belongs. See you in the next story, partner.